The world is vast. Landscapes vary dramatically from country to country, yet there is one common denominator. Prison is everywhere. How did this happen? When did this happen? But there have always been prisons, you say. Not so.
Prison as an exclusive response to crime is only about 200 years old. Before that, there were other methods of dealing with crime, some of them more humane than others. The stocks, the guillotine, banishment to penal colonies, systems of restitution. Then what happened? During the late 18th century, capitalism was born. Industrialization meant urbanization, which meant poverty and thus more crime. Thanks to the American Revolution, England lost a penal colony.
Lawyers, writers, and freethinkers filled with faith in humanity's capacity for engineering change envisioned a radically different form of punishment, one that was neater, more contained, more rational, more in line with the so-called age of reason. They used the language of hospital reform, also popular at the time, speaking of crime as a contagion that could be methodically, scientifically cured. As French philosopher Michel Foucault concludes, the world changed spectacularly when it was suddenly, quote, civilized for those who committed crimes to pay in time and isolation, not physical pain. Like capitalism's temple, the industrial factory, the prison demanded a distinct architectural look. Jeremy Bentham's famous panopticon model was in fact modeled after a factory his brother designed for Russia's Catherine the Great. Like capitalism, the prison system hinged on regulation of the body and the strict ordering of time, which came in monetary-like increments, meted out to fit the crime.
Freshly independent, avidly capitalist, and eager to prove itself more progressive than its former colonizer, America keenly lapped up such radical European ideas, and a grand irony was born. The birth of democracy was intricately bound up in the birth of the prison, freedom and the lack thereof, in paradoxical union in the new United States. Thomas Jefferson himself made some of the earliest prison drawings.
And on U.S. shores, theory was fast put into practice. During the 1820s, the modern prison was born as two competing American models opened their doors. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia brought Bentham's panopticon to life and employed a, quote, separate system, which meant that those in prison lived in perpetual solitary confinement with only a Bible. It was imagined that this was a kind of monk-like penitence, hence the term penitentiary. In New York's Auburn prison, the, quote, silent system was used. Laboring in factory-like settings, prisoners were whipped if they spoke, as if they were enslaved. Here was another vile irony. Prison slavery was thriving just as the North was fighting to end slavery in the South. After all, the 13th Amendment does not outlaw slavery, but rather makes it illegal except as punishment for a crime.
Having perfected its prison model, America exported it. 19th century European scholars made prison tours a vital stop on their visits across the pond. Frederick William IV of Prussia was one of these prison tourists, followed by rulers of Saxony, Russia, and the Netherlands, and the commissioners from France, Austria, Holland, Denmark, and Sweden. Alexis de Tocqueville and Charles Dickens were the most vocal visitors of U.S. prisons, broadcasting the horror of what they saw there. Dickens called the American prisoner a man buried alive, to be dug out in a slow round of years, and in the meantime, dead to everything but torturing anxieties and horrible despair.
And so prisons weaved their way into the fabric of global culture, throughout Europe and via its colonies around the world, from Spain to Colombia, China to Japan and India, all imitating the American model. It helped that the institution of prison expediently produced what its birthmate, capitalism, demands, a perpetual labor force. And on top of that, it became the perfect way to continue systems of oppression after the demise of slavery and colonialism. Here was an ideal way to oppress and contain those others, stigmatized by race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and/or nationality. Prison was a nefarious plot to subjugate natives or formerly enslaved people while serving the white economy's best interests.
In other words, slavery, prison, capitalism, and race have long been a deadly global cocktail. Here's how the nefarious process worked similarly around the world. Criminalize, quote, others by tilting the law against them, then incarcerate them and put them to work. In the United States, which now has 5% of the world's population, yet 25% of its prison's population, after the end of slavery, so-called, and I quote, black codes criminalized such things as loitering and joblessness, which meant that by 1870 in the South, black incarceration rates tripled those of whites. Today, there are more African Americans under criminal supervision than there were enslaved people at the height of slavery in 1850.
More than 10 times the number of enslaved people brought to the United States were brought to Brazil, which was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888. After that, policing was used to secure a labor force for coffee and sugar production. Tens of thousands of poor black Brazilians were arrested for misdemeanors, vagrancy, disorder, drunkenness, practicing of capoeira, and put to work or sentenced to stints in the army. Nowadays, among people in prison in Brazil, 63.6% are black or brown. In Australia, the 1905 Aborigines Act limited movement, governed sex, set curfews, and more for Aboriginal people, making them easy to ghettoize, stigmatize, and incarcerate en masse. Another labor force manufactured by way of prisons, assigned to fill cells, and then further criminalized by a system that remains stacked against them. Indigenous people make up some 2% of Australia's population, but they're 27.5% of its prison population. An Indigenous young person is 50 times more likely to be in sentence detention.
In New Zealand, Maori people constitute 16.5% of the national population, yet 52% of people in prison identify as Maori. The racist stats keep coming. In Canada, Indigenous adults represent 3% of the adult population, but 26% of prison admissions. In Europe, Roma people are over-incarcerated. In Hungary, for instance, Roma people make up around 40% of the prison population, despite representing 6% of the national population. In England and Wales, people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds constitute 14% of the general population, but 25% of its prison's population.
Prisons, then, are about social control and systemic racism, not public safety. In fact, robust research continues to show that not only is there no correlation between incarceration rates and crime rates, globally speaking, but prisons actually increase crime by eroding community bonds and intensifying radical inequality, all at a literal and metaphorical cost to citizens worldwide.
It all adds up to a cut and paste system of justice. The crisis of prison looks almost identical in its racist horrors from one end of the world to another. But this means that solutions to this evil problem cut across national boundaries too.
Which lands us at this global docuseries, jumping from continent to continent, weaving together a border-crossing narrative about a worldwide calamity and those rising up against it, told entirely in the voices of those who have endured prison around the world and now stand as living witnesses.
37 living witnesses to be exact. 10 episodes, 26 countries, dozens of organizations doing the work. Welcome to Incarceration Nations.